Hello, beloved friends. Welcome to this live lecture of ours today. It's good to have you all here. Today we're talking about the primordial tradition. Today we're talking about the last commandments that we left a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. We're talking about the mother and the father. What is tradition? What is primordial tradition? Well, it is the mother and father that we are to honor. And also, before we jump into it, the second half of this stream will be in the Discord for fellowship members. Please sign up at scottmanion.com/fellowship to be a part of this moving towards the ground of reality, initiation, and being a part of tradition and transforming radically at the ground of our being. But it's great to be with you here today to talk about this in this live lecture. And I hope that it helps. So, jumping straight into it, let's look over to our slides. Should see them there. And our rudimentary diagrams. That's a snake, by the way, in the middle there, if you can see it. In the diagram. So let's jump straight into it. Honor the father and mother. How do we understand this commandment? The deep interpretation of this commandment. Let's start existentially from the place of our existence, which is inside this serpent, this past, present, and future. Let's understand the everyday understanding of this. What are we? We are this knowing of being, this openness space, this existential space. You look around you, that world is given form by memory and goal. What are these things in everyday experience? Before we can understand, they're not, what they are is not the mother and father that the commandment's talking about. They are a surface everyday mother and father. These parents that we first interact with in liberal modernity, let's call them existential parents. Just to give you an idea of what this is, you know things. What you know gives form to the space that you are. Your memory gives form to how the world is for you and what sticks out in that world. What else gives form to that? Your care, your concern, and your goals. Now, what are those things we've talked about there? The things we've talked about there are past memory, what has been. Let's think about that like the everyday mother. Liberal modernity, that's also a surface understanding, a surface memory. There's, of course, the memory of the depths, which is different. It's in the unconscious. But the surface memory gives form to how we live life in modernity. We could call this low, fake, like a fake. The goals that give form, the for the sake of, as Heidegger calls it, concern and care give form to how this here, yonder being that we are is. So that future, the projection in everyday, the everyday being that we are, is not an actual, it's a construction, mimetically inherited construction, let's say. So that's the future for everyday modern man. For modern man, that is the future. The past is his limited mortal memory and limited human logos. That's what we're dealing with here. Now, most of what we are and know is not of prime value. So it's not the mother and father that we're talking about in this commandment. But nevertheless, we can move towards that. It's not of prime value, as I say here. What this commandment is talking about is not the merely mechanical knowledge that we are, that modern man is, that the modern man grasps, possesses in surface life. Before the golden calf of liberal modernity, we had more of this mother and father of the tradition, living from primordial times, which is actually revelation, and we'll get into that. And so this divine knowing of being of essence, not the surface semblance, which is revelation, gets covered over by this fake tradition, this fake liberal modernity, this golden calf that needs dissolving. You still have a spark of this, though, at the ground of your psyche that you can move towards, even though we've been completely propagandized by this mechanical crystallization that modern mimetic transmission makes us into as we're brought up into it. There's something of essence in us. There's something of this mother and father that's talked about here. That's more fundamental than everyday being and time, than everyday cause, than everyday space that we are. We possess a kernel of all these three things. Those are the low cause, the low time, the low space. But there's a kernel of high cause, high time, high space that we can interact with. And these diagrams go into. In modernity, we're within this snake, though, of this limited mortal human knowing. Let's jump over to the next slide of everyday experience. So let's just get an understanding here. Again, more into this everydayness. Let's talk about natural human reason. Now, you couldn't understand or ask questions at all without three fundamental categories. Time, that things follow one another is the most basic way of understanding it. The when, space, that things are next to one another. The where, and cause, that things exist because of one another. Cause, why? That's the most basic understanding of those three things. You could even say that those basic understandings have a high and a low to them. In the everyday interpretation that we have from modernity, what's thrown into that is modernity, materialism. But even so, that is fundamentally cut out and changed in the fall of Adam, in which temporality is made. But we're going to talk about this time, this low time. We're going to call it low time. Time has passed, as time passed since the fall, limited human logos, human knowing built up a separate word, the word of the serpent, you could call it, which is human intellect. This separate word will go into more detail as we progress. But the world picture now in modernity is kind of like it was in pagan times, before revelation had entered. But we can even just understand this low time in our basic everyday experience by understanding, well, look, the interpretation that's thrown into it is that we are just an epiphenomenon of a grinding development, a grinding natural selection from starting with base material. That's what the interpretation that's thrown into it. But even the basic, very basic understanding of this category of time is simply, which is true of temporality, is death, passing away, forgetting, passing away, falling asleep. That is what is characteristic of time, even without an interpretation of it. But like I said, these three categories apply to all three of these things. So we'll move on to the next slide and to get an understanding of what happened in the fall, which led to this everydayness that we are now. And we're just going to, these are almost a practical, we're not giving a full-on theology here. The whole purpose always of what we're doing is to lead people out of the rigid propositional superstructure, to dissolve that for practical purposes of initiation, for practical purposes of disclosing the Lord, disclosing Providence, through remembrance, as we'll get into. Friends, beloved friends. But we'll move on to the next slide. Now, what happened? How low temporality was made as a rift in primordial tradition. So what do we understand as a way of understanding this? You can see here in this diagram on the right-hand side, I've got high time, primordial tradition, eternal, Garden of Eden, full communion with God. You've got divine past, divine present, divine future. Divine future is providence, and we'll get into what that is and how that can be available. But you can see there's two arrows pointing towards Adam. So he's in communion with remembrance, divine past, and providence. So what happens with that is you're not a separate mortal knowing space at this point before the temptation, before the fall. It's a full communion with the eternal. So this eternal still exists, of course, is a place, and we're within it, and as we'll find out. But at this time, your will is in union with God. Wills are in union. There's not a separate mortal space. Now, what happens? The fall, the serpent tempts and causes a rift in temporality between alpha and omega, you can consider it. So it's like Adam is pulled out of it as a separate mortal knowing, everyday experience, mortal projection. And we'll get into the deep nature of what those things are in temporality. And so you're no longer connected to these divine faculties that I've talked about before that Adam had, because he was in connection with providence, the future, and connection with what has been and the totality of divine wisdom to commune with. You don't have that anymore. And what happens? It's replaced by the serpent's immortality. The serpent offers, you won't die, the serpent says. The Lord says you will die. And so what happens? You are then subject to death as temporality. And what replaces the divine faculties are this everyday, past, present, and future, which is the serpent's intellect and his will to power and his derivative energy of the first wine, which is built up on the war of all against all, Heraclitan fire. It's the antithetical, polemical energy that grinds against itself in reality to produce a slow, experimental, slithering development. And that's what natural selection is. These things are true of temporality. But of course, there is high cause, high time, and high space that the everyday naive view of the world doesn't know. And so that's what happens. It's torn out. As you can see, there's this fall here. Adam's torn out. And then he has his mortal knowing. And then what happens? So this is the primordial tradition. The eternal is the primordial tradition. Divine wisdom. So that's what happens. Adam, that happens. And then God doesn't abandon us. He ingresses back in to the closed circle that's created. Because he is always outside temporality, the miraculous. But that's what tradition is. It's an ingression again from the divine past, future, and present that we've been cut out from because we're nested still inside it. He doesn't abandon us. He sends his only begotten Son. Ultimately. But revelation is that. It's for mystics. Moses are able to receive them. Revelation. Are able to receive information, whatever you could say, from Providence, who is a person, who is the Lord. And so that's what happens after. And so the established tradition is founded on the eternal, initially as a revelatory ingression from outside human knowing, this low human knowing that was made during the fall. So we're sort of seeing a difference here between low and high time now. And so the primordial tradition comes from the eternal. This is a founding of it. And we see that in Revelation. So to honor the mother and father is to transform yourself at the ground, to recontact this outside, this divine remembrance and providence, through the remembrance of the tradition that's brought inside, The tradition that we have is what's known of it, but it was eternal, then brought in. So that's what remembrance is. And we'll get into that as we progress. Remembrance isn't just a remembering, it's a making present of the actual beings themselves. That's what the liturgical calendar is. That's what Christmas is, as I said in the other streams. It's a making present of the actual beings. If you actually purify yourself, you can, with the help and grace of God, make contact with them and interact with them and disclose this place that's outside of this everyday knowing that we're used to. There's a depth layer. You can look through it through purification to get out of this everyday liberal modernity. And so living tradition comes from Providence and is remembrance once it's brought in. It's from the omega point. It's from the future. And we'll understand better what that future is from the everyday experience that we're used to experiencing as we continue through here. So time is implicitly a process of depreciation, degeneration, sclerosis, and which is crystallization, hardening. In a word, it's dying. In contrast, living tradition is a life-sustaining, flourishing power that counters the gates of hell. The gates of hell won't stand against it. Death. Tradition is ensouled time. Life is ensouled corporality, space. The serpent and Adam did the original killing and separation from God. So, yeah, I think we've gone through everything there for that slide. I think I've explained all that. And so this bubble we exist in, this human logos of all human knowing, it is fundamentally it's Luciferian. Temporality is Luciferian. Before tradition, anyway, before primordial tradition is ingressed into time. So's the intellect, and that's what we're trying to not escape, but bring to heel, to fundamentally rewrite the roots of through engaging with the tradition and engaging and following Providence in initiation. So we'll go to the next slide. So this Providence, understanding Providence. What is this future? All we have in everyday experience, all we have access to, or we know of the future, is our calendar, our projections of what tomorrow is going to be, usually what our goals are, and that's the future. That is the sort of modern intellectual future that's in the way of an existentially or essentially available future we can engage with. How is that? Well, we're all aware of the unconscious. We have dreams. What is the unconscious? Well, the unconscious applies also to the object, not just the subject, collective unconscious. We know, again, I'm not going to go into every detail, but we know quantum mechanics fundamentally. There's philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup and others who talk about this, and Jung, of course. And the results of quantum mechanics mean the empirical worldview that we're separate from the object somehow is bunk. The certainty of the empiricist worldview is gone, and the scientism worldview is gone. I'm not going to go into the details of that. I've talked about it many times before. But fundamentally, look at it this way. The unconscious is, you interact with it in dreams. But if you think about it, unconscious also means unknown. It means not within this human logos bubble we know. It's unknown. The Lord is fundamentally unknown. Yes, we know him through tradition, but the eternal is unmasterable. It's the new, it's the future, right? So the unconscious, which you interact with in dreams, what is that? This unconscious. It's not yet inside. It has not yet arrived. When will it arrive? The future. So there's something that's around you that hasn't yet arrived that you can engage with. That's temporal becoming. It has not yet come inside, yet still nevertheless is somewhere. Again, you receive this in intuition, and that doesn't mean women's intuition or anything like that. It's Bergsonian intuition, which is something that is developed through purification, deep religious purification. You have access to that and you engage with that and you can receive information, you could call it, from that. Unconscious. Again, you can be sent things that will come to be in dreams, things that you don't yet know that you will eventually. So that's can be an existentially available future. Go deeper though. What's the ground of the subject that has not yet arrived? Well, as people like Jung, the great mystics, and the traditional picture understands, it's the Lord is the essence of the unconscious, is the ground of the unconscious, and is the ground of the object and the subject. It's the Logos. He is the future. So he is also the outside, which is what Providence is. I mean, so if you just keep looking deeper into being, and you can do that, if you stare long enough in deep Christian meditation, these areas of unconscious becoming begin to awaken. That's why the great philosophers and great theologians could predict the future, because they are interacting with these levels of becoming, which is the will. We live in modernity, we're in space and time. The unconscious is just will on its own, yet still temporal. Then one more, you're in the eternal. So that becoming area becomes available, or was available, to people like Nietzsche from staring in and questioning, but not questioning just by a proposition, but looking deeply into it, staring at it, meditating at it, of what's available to you through the senses to go through them to essence. Obviously, this must be done as Christian meditation with prayer, because that's what keeps delusion away, of course, and other beings that would wish to deceive you. So that should give you an idea that this future is something that can become available through purification. It's a thing that can be revealed through your practice and engagement in the Christian life, as is known by the mystics and people like Valentin Tomberg. And in the final analysis, it's personal. It's not some dead thing that just sends like a machine. It can only be engaged with. It's the Lord. It can only be engaged with. In a moral sense, the reality is moral at its ground. It's moral and personal. So that's Providence. But you should get a sense where you have the basics of it with dreams and such. Not always. A lot of dream is just arbitrary. But that's what psychologists were engaged with. So let's move on to the next one. So what you're involved with is trying to clear this modern fake future, projection, and the possession of the surface ideas of modernity, and even what has been. The deep historical archetypes need to be dissolved so you can become your future. You can become Providence. You can become like Christ. But you have to clear this mimetically inherited lusty person that you are first. You have to get rid of this mortal past, mortal future, mortal present to develop. Next slide. Low time. On time. I'm going to go to the bathroom very quickly, friends. Just bear with me and watch some nature clips there. I'll be back in a second. Back, friends. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about the primordial tradition. We talk about low and high time. And so, what is this low time founded on will to power? Well, it's the things follow on from one another. It's things merely conceived as being following what has been. It's not just material cause, it's any type of determinism. So it's like an Edward Dutton heredity determinism. It's a astrological determinism. It's a Freudian determinism. All of that is part of this grinding time. Morally without content and without essence. Things just following one another. It's a utilitarianism. That's what happens. There's no essence if they're not bound to one another by the guiding, bolstering thread of tradition, which is essence, which is also moral, as we said. But this low time has no moral cause, either past or present. Now, naive time, conceived of another way in modernity, is development, evolution, but from what has been. Now, that theory of biological heredity presupposes three things: the principle of preservation through heredity, without which the existence of the species would be inconceivable. Two, the appearance of mutations, which could also be considered an experiment, without which there would be no progress and, in fact, no evolution at all. Thirdly, time understood as the all-powerful soul master-teacher, guaranteeing through its experience and by way of chance occurrence, immeasurable opportunity for natural selection, breeding, and experimentation. In low time, time is actually evolution. To believe in evolution in facticity, is to believe in low time. In fact and actuality are temporal terms. It is to believe in the serpent's fake solution to death. It's transhumanism. One day, it's transhumanism, the slow grinding, slithering as a replacement for revelatory action, for divine wisdom that we used to have before the fall. It's the spirit of the times. It's the war of all against all. It's the development of politics and culture through the war of all against all. It moves up through all domains. It's Hegelian dialectic. Now, the whole thing presupposes no moral view, but merely utility. Whatever is fittest has the most utility wins. This is the will to power, the will to more, the lust for more. It's the energy and immortality that the serpent promised. He didn't lie from his perspective. What he believes, what he thinks those things mean are opposite to God, though, as we'll find out, as we know. So you have this low replacement, which is the grinding intellect and electricity of polemic. No love, no cooperation. It's his solution to the death which he created and the decay which he created and unlocked through his temptation. Now, our general experience understands this low time, as I think I already said, as this forgetting, as this sleep, as this death. But there's a solution to this that's not serpentine grinding and lust for more, and which is, in the end, just a crystallization. It ends up being you're a slave to which you'll see, AI, or provokings of when you think you're free, it's a fake freedom. As the prodigal son realizes, it's a fake freedom. Because providence is miraculous, it's the causeless cause from outside. But these causes are all what has been. These grinding developments, it's like Sauron, you're a slave to the ring. In the end, you think you're free, but you're a slave to the thing you lust for. And so, what's the solution? Remembrance, resurrection, awakening. So we've sort of talked about a bit of this already, this time. The serpent's immortality versus God's immortality. Serpentine death to God's death. And the key to this is in the prodigal son story as well. So we followed the temptation, we left. If you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will die, the Lord says. The serpent says you will not die, you will be as gods. Which one's true? The serpent has the serpent's truth is a half-truth from his perspective. This creates his own word, this separate knowing space. Like, God's truth is either it's true or it doesn't exist. Yes and no. The serpent's truth is this halfway term of this arbitrary space of serpentine knowing that we now actually live in. The intellect, the temporality as made by him. But it's a problem he created, and he has a solution to his own problem. And so death, or that word, is cut off at its ground. That's why the existentialist is thrown into the world, as Heidegger talks about. You're cut off. You're fundamentally an orphan. You don't have access to this essence, to this outside. You can reunify with it. As an essentialist, you can reunify with it. But this word, it grinds its way up, and it's limited mortality and must keep expanding to fill the endless void that continues to dissolve through forgetting and death and sleepiness. It requires more bolstering of will to power, of polemical. And you even see this on things like Twitter. There's people that run off will to power, that require battle and war to keep feeding their lack of authority at the depths of their being. And so their way is will to power. The way is not love. And love isn't naive love. Love is willed good. It's a very difficult word to define. Essential love, which is the ground of reality, can't be defined in human words. You can try. So death for the serpent is to have this separate word dissolve, this separateness. It's to be reunified with the true wine, the second wine, to be reunified with the Father who is true freedom. He wants this death. For him, death is the removal of this separateness that he created, this arbitrariness that he created and pulled us into. And his first wine and his polemic and his world made on the war of all against all. War is the father of all, as Heraclitus said. Now, the serpent's immortality is this, like I said, it's this grinding natural selection. It's this slow crystallization. It's this development of AI. It's the dead bark disconnected from the whole root system of the tree that he wants to render crystallize. And that's the immortality. He'll give you what he promises, but there'll be no life. You'll live forever as a slave, as transhuman, as a slave to your desire. You'll live forever in your lust. As AI develops and as that's transhumanism fundamentally, is serpentine. Of course, we know, though, there are causes that are beyond this grinding. I mean, natural this stuff occurs. It's the serpent. Evolutionary cause is the serpent. It exists. It's just within temporality. There's more than that guides. There's causes that guide outside of that, as we'll find out. But let's talk about, that's basically, yes, I think I've described all that, the serpent's immortality. Of course, God's immortality is direct contact with his love, his providence, the future, guided and contributing in free collaboration, two wills in loving union. Singing in the choir, that's also what the serpents wanted. It's singing as a different song, your own song, rather than singing in the choir, freely in the choir, in harmony with the choir. Instead of that, you wanted an arbitrary song. You can see where the subjectness, the ego comes from. The ego is this serpent. It's something that needs to be subservient, though. It's not that it won't exist. It's something that we made subservient to the Lord and brought into contact with providence and intuition. And so we recognize fundamentally that Lucifer and Satan are very close to us. That's why these temptations are always there. It's part of our fallen makeup that must be perfected. Like every human being, you think in modernity, we feel and think that, oh, this normal life is all there is. And it's kind of just, you're just this little thing, little cog in the world who's supposed to raise a family and produce, and that's it. But the truth of the matter is that every little thing you do matters, and God cares about all of it, as we'll talk about later. But this grand conflict is in you. These spirits are in and with you. It's not just this everyday modern existence. Is it the eternal way, or you could call it struggle, but way, you are dealing with cosmological forces. You are the meeting of both of them. You are the meeting of temporality and eternity, or you're supposed to become that. So everything you do matters. Everything matters that you do. You are dealing with this grand scale in your life, and it's the serpent that wants to convince you that you're not, and that his world of existence and his promises, his AI and his transhumanism is something you should lust for, when actually you can get to this place, which is the primordial tradition shows us. And so, of course, death for God is to be cut off from this place. It's to be cut off from him and these divine faculties. But he withdrew so you could have freedom. He's not going to force the prodigal son to come back. He'll wait for you to have faith, for you to freely accept and move towards him. Then he'll show himself. Because he's God, he's loving Father. And so that life is being reunited with providence and remembrance, like we were talking about. To be with truth, to have these divine faculties restored. And how's that done? Well, you live off the first Adam. In modernity, you are the first Adam. How's that done? By following the Lord, who is the new Adam, who is the synthesis of life and death. That's his solution to the problem the serpent created, was to send his only begotten son. He's not going to abandon us to this situation. He sends the primordial tradition. He sends it inside. He sends his prophets, grants them revelation. His solution is remembrance, awakening, resurrection that cannot fall against these dissolving forces, this problem that was created by the serpentine forces. He's not going to force you to do it, though, because he's not the serpent. The serpent promises you freedom in modernity, and in fact, you'll end up being forced to do it because the choice won't be up to you eventually. You'll be a provoked being. What Christ does is fundamentally not allow that to be permanent for now. Is that he'll free you from the slavery that the serpent wants to put you in. He'll always come and free you if you accept him. That's what he does. He pulls you out of that mimetic spiral. He pulls you out of that low temporal desire and lust that's thrust at you and provoked by you, by advertising, by everything. He pulls you out of that. He's always there for the prodigal son to return to. He's already walked the way and shown the way. And so that's his solution. That's the God's solution. The serpent's solution is, like I said, it's that mimetic grinding development, that expansion, that will to power expansion of this mortal human knowing bubble is his solution. He promises freedom, but in fact it's slavery. You will get permanence, but you'll be a permanent slave in the future to your desires. I think that's about everything. The promise, like I said, it's false. You'll end up an immortal extension of a technical system. And so this is it's like the difference between Sauron and Gandalf. Gandalf, his hierarchy when he comes back, he has authority, whereas a power structure is compulsion. You'll be compelled and provoked by the ring and the War of the Ring and Sauron at the top of it. You'll live forever, but forever separate from him and his freedom that he provides. And Gandalf he doesn't force anyone. He encourages. And even because he has authority, his encouragement naturally comes out of his word. He articulates the Lord's word. The Lord's word is with and in him. You'll just tend to trust him. The good is with him. And so beings freely collaborate together. In a hierarchy, collaborate together and join freely in a hierarchy of authority. It will become apparent that those who have this substance, you could call it, this authority, means to be capable, and to know. And in a divine sense, those three things are: how much are you alike to Christ, or, theosis? How much are you capable of collaborating with him in the miraculous, as sacred magic, as it's called in Christian Hermeticism? And to know, how much do you know of the divine? That's revelation. These things can be engaged with. The more you go through initiation, which is nothing more really than the practices of what the monastics are up to. So, moving on. That is the separateness of time and its death, and the difference between what the serpent promises and such. So, low cause versus high cause. So, like I said, cause is things exist because one another. That's that basic category we were talking about. Low cause is merely a destination based on what has been, like I said. It is even, that's devoid of moral cause, but still it can be deterministic to have a heredity cause and a karmic cause, which means a destination based on, which the Western word for karma is destiny, like I've said. Karma is just a word that people understand, which means what goes around comes around. It's related to your sin, but still it would be deterministic if these two things were on their own. That would be moral cause. That's low. The moral cause isn't so much low, but without that in the picture, it's utilitarian. It's materialism, like we mentioned before. But this leaves out of the equation, like we said, there's a different cause, a high cause, a cause that comes from the future. What is that? It's the miraculous. The miraculous is what defeats determinism. You don't do anything in the real meaning of the word originally as something new without the miraculous. It's only the miraculous that allows for anything new to be done, not as a mimetic product of what has been, of heredity, of character, of whatever makes up the existential empirical subject. Miraculous is the ingression from the free spirit of the eternal that allows us to do actions that are causeless causes. So that's what the miracle is. It's a cause from, you've heard people talk about the final cause, the omega point. It's a cause from the end, who is this providence we've been talking about. So the miraculous ingression is what stops us from being slaves. We're nested in him. We have the image and likeness of God. That's what this means. So there is some of our behavior, very rarely in modernity, but the more we engage with this, the more we can become something that's an ingression from outside temporality, that isn't just a slave to the past. That's high moral cause. And how do we understand this from the Gospels? Well, the blind man. The apostles ask if his blindness is due to his heredity or his sins, karma, destiny, you could call it. If I've ever mentioned destiny in terms of providence, what I mean is providential purpose. Destiny really, like I said, as a word, means a destination based on what has been. So you're determined by your past. That's really what that word means. But I have sometimes said destiny, a providential destiny. Really, that's not destiny. It's because it's a destination based on the future, on the outside. So this is the traditional picture of what it is, what providence is. And so that's high cause. And how do we understand that from the Gospels? It's when Jesus says that he was made blind that the works of God might be made manifest through him. That's providential cause. In the blind man's case, the cause is from the future. This is providence. This is miraculous ingression of moral cause from the future, completely new. All revelation is this, sent from the omega point, from the providential future that we were cut off from since the fall. Seeds are planted and futures are revealed and experienced. Mystics are transported there so that the seeds may be planted to blossom from the end, who is him, the final cause, the future, to be blossomed from that end and to blossom in the future. But it's from the future. So this is why it's complicated. It's very complicated. The divine, the Lord is very complicated when it comes to time. He's above our, as philosophers would say, as Nick Land's even talked about, it's retrocausal. It comes from the future. These causes come from the future and ingress. And they also become the future. These are sort of paradoxes from our modern understanding. But you can see this in the miracles, of course. There is, like when Moses was at the transfiguration, that is him, the living Moses. It's not the spirit of Moses, it's the mystic Moses. It's Moses from when he's interacting with Jesus in the Old Testament. That is Moses, the same Moses taken there from then. Just like in the miracle at the wedding at Cana, when they're shown doxa at the wedding of Cana, and they believed, they be lived in. They were taken there for a second. And that seed's planted, the seed's there in that revelation for all of it that unfolds with Lazarus and also the resurrection and the crucifixion. So this is the mystery of how time really is. And as we said earlier, is that this is a future that is available to you if you can get underneath the fake future projections and goals to disclose a pathway that he actually has for you that is free of this provokings of modernity. That's what you want to disclose. In collaboration, though, it's still, he wants you to freely decide. He's not going to enslave you to something. But he has a plan for you that's providential, that's not a product of the past. And we desperately need that now because everything is becoming a product of what has been. AI, all of this is a rejigging of what has been. Modern art, all of this art, vitalism, it's all a rejigging of what has been. We desperately need ingression from outside. Artists to be mystics so they can receive and have art that are sacred forms. Participate in this sacred magic, which is just nothing more than the miraculous. Collaborative miraculous. Yeah. So high time, tradition as high time. Tradition is the moral content of time. It's the essence of time. It's the distillation of everything, of essence from things that aren't of value. You could think about it. It's distilled. The stuff that's not of value is distilled out in this picture. And all that is brought inside to live and flourish as eternal. It's the distillation of everything of essence, and all that is brought inside to live and flourish as eternal, as a guiding and developing, weaving thread of that which is of prime value. And we know what value is. It's fundamentally a being who is he. Even dark values are entities. The Skittles people identify with values. They are identifying with beings that they don't recognize because all they have access to are the surface propositions. Deeper underneath that propositional superstructure of the value they're identifying with are beings. Thought is just one part of it in modernity. There is will and feeling that go with ideals or values, which are only called ideals and values on our side. They are beings. So that's who's possessing those people. You can look at texts like The Anthropological Structure of the Imaginary by Gilbert Durand that talks about ideology and different types of thinking in modernity, how they actually spawn from archetypes, how they spawn from entities. And it's very, very convincing. Jung was involved with such things. Dugan sort of talks about it. But of course, I don't agree with everything he says. A lot of it I completely disagree with. And like I said, I've said before, he's not an authentic initiate. Even though he talks about the radical subject, he isn't one himself. Like Gwenon, like Evola, like Eliada, they did involve themselves in practical matters, but they never practically achieved initiation. They didn't make mystic contact. They only theorized about it. So, yeah, what we're talking about is part of the preparation. All this is part of the preparation that helps you move towards essence, to become an essentialist, not an existentialist provoked by the gods of this world. So, high time. The mere things following one another, which are not of significance of the true real, the good, the true, the beautiful, the way, truth, and life, are forgotten. High time's a distillation. Well, it's what's brought inside of the eternal. But these little things, it is a distillation in a sense, because what you do also participates in that. What you do matters. What's essential of what you do matters. It's not just a grand thing for grand people. It includes your little life. And this is fundamentally something that I have to get across in a way. And what's so magic about dealing with and having Christ become a fact of your experience is, you know, when you're living your life and you go on, I don't know, like a vacation on your own, or you go on a trip on your own, as an existentialist, as a everyday modern, you think you do these things and you go, oh, the people in power, the everyday people, the people in power, the socialites, all these grand parties I could be at. I'm just here doing this little thing. It doesn't matter. And fundamentally under that is a desire, a lust for to be part of this thing. But their thing actually has no essence. But the thing that's so moving is high above them. High above them. Again, you've got this feeling, like I mentioned, as that modern, that it doesn't matter. And so you can have a nice experience, but no one's there to share it with you. And so it might be nice, but it's ultimately going to be forgotten. It only matters to you, and you don't matter. It's just not the truth of reality, though. And the beautiful thing that occurs when Christ becomes a fact of your experience, and the miraculous, is that he is the highest value above any power structure, above any Trump, above any, I don't know, flashy parties that were at the coronation of Trump, or whatever they call it, whatever they do for the president. He doesn't care about any of that. But yet he's the highest being, the master of creation. He doesn't care about any of that. There are moments of essence of the smallest person that matter to him that will be eternal. Of this, a small person, a small monk doing an action of deep faith, even the death conversion of someone, a atheist that converts at the last minute. These things will all be remembered in the book of life. But this great God, that's why people might look at Jesus and when he washes the feet and go, oh, it's a cucky or whatever. You're not getting it, man. This is the creator. It's like, think about the people's feet he's washing a sheep, like when a farmer washes a sheep's feet. It has no effect whatsoever on his status. He is the creator that washes your feet. It has no effect on his status whatsoever. Of course he washes the feet because he loves you. And so what's so meaningful about that, when he accompanies you on the smallest things, is that he cares about all of it. and the things you do that are of essence, and those little memories of yours, are experienced by him with you. He remembers. It's even like Tolkien says, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. It's like the smallest person matters. That you're living you are cosmological as the microcosm. So you're not just this little being, and he cares about every little thing you do and wants to help you. Everyone. And when that actually becomes a fact of your experience, undoubtable, unquestionable fact, your whole life's changed because you always are accompanied. You're fundamentally no longer alone. Whereas the existentialist, who is the person at the party that hungers after power, that's at the coronation with the highest of the high, who fundamentally those people all have no ground. They don't have authority. They've got power. They don't have authority, though, because you have to be an initiate to have authority. You have to be a monastic. You have to be a priest to have authority. You can be a king and have authority if you go through this process, but they don't, or they don't know how. They don't have authority. They're not connected fundamentally to Providence, but you can be. And he cares about the littlest things. Yeah, that's a bit of a digression, but it's something that I needed to get across that fundamentally changes everything you do. Is that the nicest things that you can do are go on your own to a place, to a manor house or something. In fact, going with people could ruin it. Better to go alone, because then the Lord can show himself through the miraculous when there are less people around. Through birds, whatever it might be, show himself in symbolism. Or directly through the spiritual faculties. But that's a bit of a digression. So time conceived of as evolution is amoral, and the fruits of amoral ideas are generally immoral. One relates to the world in quite a different way, though, when one conceives of time as the bearer of living tradition, the bearer. High time is the bearing, becoming of tradition, onward in development and memory, resurrecting, remembering, awakening, mother and father, remembrance, providence. Then time becomes transformed. Past, present, and future become a morally connected organic whole in which what is of the past, fathers and mothers, is honored, valued, and cherished as inexhaustible sources of the fountains of the living water of tradition, which flows into the future as it's born on. It is the essence of time. Tradition is the essence of time. It's the ground of time. Everything else is something that will eventually be forgotten. That's not of essence. But the little things you do matter, like I said, because at the end of the time, they will be immortal. The body will also be resurrected, because that's wrapped up with action. What you do will. Every moment in the present provides a possibility and an opportunity for reflecting on the values, beings of tradition, bringing them to mind. That's what remembrance is. The future holds the hopeful expectation of the ripening of the fruit of tradition, which is the keystone. Providence is the keystone. It's the perfection. The perfection is the keystone. The foundation stone is remembrance. Peter's C. The stone, and time won't stand against it. But providence, the keystone, and the foundation stone are both required. The future, providence, is that keystone. That's the symbolic. I've talked about this in a previous stream about understanding providence, which is called, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Providence or something. But it's got an image of a keystone as the image of it. So what you're doing when you're reflecting on the values through the liturgical calendar isn't remembering something that happened. It's bringing them to presence. In the liturgy, Christ is brought to presence. He's there. And he's noticed emotively, even at the basic level. That's what remembrance is. It's a bringing of the mother, you could call it, of tradition that has ingressed through revelation inside. But also it's father and mother, but there is a providence that's always there. It hangs around in temporality. It's still there. I won't go into the esoteric understanding of that and why, but the Gospels exist for all time eternally. What Jesus did is something that is in temporality now, forever, that can be engaged with. When you read the Gospels, you look past them to the deep memory of eternal essence that's been brought inside the universal church, you could call it, and the universal gospel, the fifth gospel, which is the name that's called it sometimes. You read the Gospels and it reaches beyond them to the truth. So that's what you're doing. You need to understand that you're not remembering. Remembrance is a remembering, is a reorganing, connecting to the organ of the past as a real being. So essential to living tradition is its resistance to the powers of forgetting, sleep, and death. And that's what all this is about. Of passing away. The gates of hell, Hades, will not overcome it. Hades, though, corresponds to Hebrew Sheol, doesn't mean the place of the condition of the damned, but simply the kingdom of the dead, or simply death, which is temporality. Therefore, it's a matter with respect to the gates of death, of entrances and exits along the pathways of time, all of which lead to death. The promise that lies in Christ's words, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it," contain the mandate, the promise, and the blessing of freedom from temporality and death, the power to resist ultimately and make immortal, really, the tendencies of death. In other words, on account of this foundation, as long as the church continues to remain founded on the See of Peter, the apostle, and his spirit, which is immortal, as a living tradition, as an ingression as well, providentially, it will remain immune to the death-bringing influences of temporality. The church equals what has been, which was brought inside of the eternal and of eternal value. Church is eternal remembrance of initiation, the initial, which is the eternal, which means being rewritten at our roots fundamentally. If we're remembering the father and mother, we're being rewritten at our roots, away from modernity, to be the foundation stone and the keystone. Remember, the father and mother is those two things. And so this just helps as a way with high time, high space, and high cause to see how these things sort of come together. So tradition as high time. One, zoom into this. Can't really read it very well. Every living tradition is based on two forces working together. One, the sustaining one and two. One, the sustaining force of memory that's oriented to the past. Two, the force of hope oriented towards the future and receiving inspiration from it. The omega point. One, it preserves the past from being forgotten. Two, gives shape to the future understood as the path towards perfection guided by providence. Again, this is to do with honoring the father and mother. One, memory, the motherly principle preserves tradition. Two, the fatherly principle guides it towards the goal in the future, hope, providence, the omega point. And three, synthesis in our collaboration in ritual and action, in the rhythm of prayer and suffering and then benediction, like breathing in a way. Between both those things makes present in moving towards union and the reestablishment of contact between the divine being brought in as memory in temporality and providence in us. Honoring the father and mother is doing them both is a synthesis. The length of the tradition, the life of the tradition, of every tradition has its basis in the commandment, honor your father and your mother, and then synthesize these by practicing. If a tradition or church is not doing these things, it's dead, dying, and it's become a golden calf. As we know, 95% of what we see is a golden calf. It needs dissolving, it needs eating and reevaluating to return to the primordial tradition, which is, of course, Christianity. Not the spirit of the times and liberal modernity that's infected everything. And so, as a kind of equation, which should never be, you could say, remembrance, memory, mother, presencing high space, sacred space, plus providence, father, hope, presencing high cause and future, plus our action and participation, synthesis equals living tradition, high time, developing tradition towards keystone, omega point. The synthesis brings you into high space, high cause, high time that can't exist unless they're all together. This is the kingdom of heaven within that's talked about. It's come to earth in you if you do this, honoring the father and mother, among the whole Christian life, of course, and initiation. Tradition binds what comes before and comes later, whether in progress or regression, in ascension or descension. This is because it's the valuative anchor of all. It's the measure of all. Regarding good and bad, how to know the difference between progress and regression, ascension and descension. It originally comes from outside, though. It's not a mortal valuation. It's not a mortal value, which is a being, as we know. The holy comes from far above us. Is the self of selves. Is the I that is not is more I than I myself am. The God of essence, not the God of existence. It's within. And so what are you doing fundamentally? Of course, to actually have the kingdom of heaven come, which is the final goal, it has to be done first, which is how you actually justify the prayer, asking for the Lord's kingdom and his will to be done, is through doing it first in you. That's the justification for it, of what you have to do. You have to transform the microcosm first, and that aids in the final transformation of the macrocosm with the kingdom of heaven coming to earth, which will eventually. So, low space versus high space, horizontal and vertical. When we ask for the kingdom of heaven to come to earth, the kingdom to come, we're not talking about space as in a vineyard or some other space. We're talking about not horizontal, but the vertical space. So that's when you want to understand what high space is, it's valuative. And you move up in it, and the way the world presences for you changes as you move towards divine faculties, you could say, based on how you morally progress. We're not talking about an outer space of planets and stars, but a moral space. The sublime is height, and base denotes depth. These places are unconscious to us in modernity. They are in the unconscious. They are revealed deeper levels of reality and creation that need to be awakened and traversed. It's like I said, it's valuative space, a space of divine beings as we move towards him, as we morally develop and spiritualize and dissolve modernity, the golden calf that is the thought regime that we are in modernity. And in a sense, thinking about it that way, you become sacred space as you engage with the tradition. That knowing space then becomes no longer profane. You could also say that the intellect sacrifices itself and merges with intuition, in other terms, more philosophical terms. And the divine becomes a phenomena we interact with, like I've said already. We become more able to see the essence behind the phenomena in our day-to-day experience. Starting with the essence of the self, the subject, the unconscious, the Lord Jesus Christ. This happens through initiation in a Christian life, like I've talked about before. That's becoming sacred space. But you're gaining the divine faculties that I've talked about before. Of course, this is a difficult, long process. It involves completely transforming your life through the practices I've talked about in other streams. And what is initiation? It's concentration without effort. It's the 3 oaths of the tradition: poverty, obedience, chastity. But there are practices related to all that stuff, aside from also living the Christian life. So, yeah. So when we think about the tradition, though, it's wrapped up with those 3 things in the 3 oaths. It depends on doing high cause and high time, the other 2, going up in this evaluative space. The more we participate in honoring the mother and father, making his will our will, his commandments our wish, that's how you do it, the more we begin to transform into him, Christ, through deeply understanding the moral and essential aspect of these 3 categories. Do we help become them, among other things, and reach them as a fact of experience by fulfilling yourself with the will of the Father, by making his rules the content of our will. That's how you do it. Do we honor the Father? Gaining access to Providence. And this is obedience. It's the obedience oath I just mentioned. Again, there's a whole host of practices related to that. But that's what's going on fundamentally in honoring the Father. So we're faithful to the church as the mother in remembrance, to live in the liturgical tradition, to make her present, gaining faith, and we follow divine will sent from the Father, Providence, starting with absorbing revelatory law of the past and then following more directly with growing communication with intuition, divine instinct, objective conscience, gaining hope. So remembrance, gaining faith, and then gaining hope. And hope is Providence. Hope is a bringing to fruition in you, but it's also a fruit you engage with. It's also a person. And the synthesis of hope and faith is love. It's union with God, which is, again, nothing more than the tradition we've been talking about. So honoring the tradition is, what is it? What are the monastics talk about it being? Purification, illumination, union, faith, hope, love. That's what goes on in those 3 steps. You could divide them down further, but that's what's going on in Christian Hermeticism as well. So that's how you move up on the horizontal, and that's how much is in these commandments as you move towards essence, as you see them essentially. So let's paraphrase this: honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord's. Your days may be long in the land the Lord gives you. The second part of the commandment, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord gives you. It doesn't mean years in physical life in a certain spatially determined place, like I said, but longevity of what is of you that is most important for life. Ideals. And an ideal is related to a being. An ideal, we hear ideal, it just means, again, we just think a propositional superstructure, this thing that's created, but an actual ideal is connected with thought, feeling, and the will when they're properly united together. And they're from outside. That's what we're talking about here. Things of essence and of love within the field of activity granted them by God. That's what this means. That's the space it's talking about. That's the longevity it's talking about. That's the time it's talking about. In other words, through honoring the tradition, remembrance, Mary, mother, faith, and providence, hope, Jesus, and the Father, through becoming them, the essential that we become through this moral purification, by becoming this life, it will be long in the domain where its mission is determined. It means that if you honor the tradition, you will spiritualize, regain your immortality before the fall. Sacred space implicitly is a domain with a mission, saving. The kingdom of heaven is within the individual once he honors the tradition and, in a sense, becomes it. We're talking about these things. It's not theology. We're talking about these things in a way to help practice. But, in a sense, he becomes them. He plays his part in the goal of bringing of the kingdom of heaven to earth in the macrocosm, a future goal that must at first be manifested in individuals by transforming the microcosm. I've got here. So, what is meant by the law of longevity of tradition in the domain peculiar to tradition? What is meant is the law of the longevity of tradition in the domain particular to the tradition. It's not a question of the promise of lengthening biological life. Like I said, this lengthening will be granted in a certain territory, this lengthening will be granted in a certain territorial place. Rather, it's a matter of prolonging continuation of the operational effect of significance, essence, like we've been talking about, meaning, the essence of time, to life's content and worth, even the small things and events and actions that you take that are in love and in faith and in hope matter to him in the field of activity that was meant for them. So in a sense, it means the more you become these things, the more you engage with the tradition, the more it's sort of like an unofficial sainthood. It means that of your life, which you bring about in faith, I already said that, sorry. But like the saints, it will live on helping people after the body passes, meaning they continue the domain of their mission after bodily death because they honored the mother and father. Tradition is the entering into the spirit of what in you is of eternal value. It's the unofficial, you can think about it like unofficial sainthood. It is being spiritualized and living long through the essentializing of the self, progressing morally with the tradition and honoring it. If you do this, you yourself become spiritualized tradition to a certain degree. And that's why the saints continue their activity after death. They still are. But most of us, of course, will go to the eternal rest with the Father. But what is of eternal value in our little lives will all be entered into the book of life forever. Okay. A lot of that's a mouthful, but I hope it's helping open up what tradition is. Thou shalt not kill. The tradition. Tradition is ensouled time. Life is ensouled world or ensouled corporality. We say that the body has a soul, but in truth, we say the human being has a soul. What we're saying is the body has a soul, saying the human being is the body. It's around the other way. The soul, the human being, has a body. It's nested inside soul. That's a better way of thinking about it. It's around the other way. You have arms and legs because of a will to grasp and a will to take and a will to advance. Will is fundamental. Facticity comes later. So you have a body. The soul has a body. It's the same with tradition. As above, so below. Tradition has time as its place of action, place of saving, its domain of activity. The soul has the body as its domain of activity. You could also say that the eternal has temporality as his place of saving. So temporality is nested inside him. We all are. The subject is, the object is, all of it is. We're the image of likeness of God. It's the same for us. It's similar for us as it is for him. The only way of understanding him is through us. Nothing in existence can be used to help disclose him. That's why he says his name is I am, because he's nothing in existence. The only way to understand him is by using, and that's why you're not supposed to say it, because only he can say his name. Just like only you can say I, it means nothing for someone else to try speak to you by calling you I. But he shares that name, I am the I am, as a teaching tool to teach us, because we're the only analog for him. He's the God of the essential, of the self, of the most inward. He's more inward than you yourself are, more I than I myself am. He's nothing that is. God is not. He's not in existence. Surface existence. And so he, the Lord, has temporality. He allows it. He withdrew. He allows the first wine to go on. He allows he allows the prodigal son to go off with his half of the life, his half of the wealth, to spend it. And when he comes back and finds him, immediately he embraces him and welcomes him home, grants him life. And so, understanding that, we can go further. You're nested inside him, like I said. We can go further. That just helps you understand that time isn't tradition is ensouled time, just like you are. Your body is your soul has the self, like I said. But thou shalt not kill. This is all related to this. Is de-souling. It's an extension of thou shalt not kill. Is saying thou shalt not kill tradition. Thou shalt not kill ensouled time. It must live, blossom towards providence, and be remembered. Tradition as a living represencing of that which is of eternal value, of the Lord, the liturgical calendar. It's not some remembering of some past historical event. It's an event that happens every year. The resurrection happens every year. The Lord helps us more in certain, as relates to his different aspects, his springtime aspect, his winter aspect, his birth, his Christ child aspect, his summer, and his autumn aspect replay themselves over and over, and he helps at those times of years in certain particular ways. So this thou shalt not kill, all the commandments after it apply, because your being, your ensouled being, is also your property. Thou shalt not steal. It's also your reputation. Thou shalt not bear false witness, because that's a murdering and de-souling of your extended being. Same with adultery. You're murdering something that's ensouled by committing adultery. They're all related to the same thing, just like killing is related to tradition. Thou shalt not kill the tradition. De-souling people. And that's the meaning. That's the meaning of those commandments and what primordial tradition is. Honoring the father and mother is to continue the weaving in a connection of providence and remembrance as a kind of golden mean spiral. Because, of course, the whole of temporality has final causes for everything, prototypical and typological, things that are eternal, that guide what things are. These are the causes that also interact with time, not just evolution. There's an ingression from the eternal, from the future, that is guiding things. In a sense, combating the serpent. Michael guides those things. The master strategist. And so that's about everything. But we'll go over into the Discord after this. But thank you very much for listening. I hope that's helped everyone. I'll have a look at the chats as I always do, of what you've said, and answer any questions before we head over into the Discord for part 2. If you want to participate in that, go to scottmannion.com/fellowship. And these notes from all the different streams are available in there if you want to read them in detail, along with other things. Of course, it's most rewarding to participate in this process of initiation with other people along the road who share their experiences too. And it's been, like I've said, it's been very rewarding for me. So please join that at scottmannion.com/fellowship and participate. But Let's have a look at what people have said, if they've said anything. Don't know yet. Let's have a look. Jump over to nature, vibes. And oh, that was pretty quick. The stream is went a lot quicker than I thought it would. Usually I go on these long rants that go for 2 hours, but this one actually ended way quicker than I thought. Probably because I read more from it. Usually I go off on okay, we've got a lot of stuff here. Okay. Are you talking about the temporal and atemporal meaning? Mother as intemporality and incarnation, father as atemporal and in some sense abstraction. It's quite difficult. I wouldn't say abstraction. I think you can say there's also historical father once it's brought inside, but it's very complicated in considering these things. Can you cross Kierkegaard and Nietzsche's abyss multiple times in a lifetime? It's definitely something that is, and I've seen it. Rudolf Steiner talks about the same thing. It's sort of connected too with what John of the Cross talks about, like being blasted out of the body with no point of reference. But Steiner talks about that, the abyss. PJW sent me, and you're great. So you have in me as subscribers. Thanks, Zach. Thanks for watching. Horizontal plane versus vertical. Yeah, I think that probably got answered later in the stream. God be with you, Scott. Thank you, Tech Noir Graphics. Yeah, I mean, that looks like everything. I mean, I'll just do the live chat. Thank you, Scott. Your streams are fantastic. You're welcome, username. Thanks for watching. Join the fellowship. Looks like that's it for questions. I've read all your comments, guys. I always read all your comments, so please comment on the videos. It's helpful to know for good feedback. Losing my job in a month, Contra Mondum says, don't worry, the Lord has a plan for you, but you have to be proactive at the same time. All right. I'll see you over in the Discord, everyone. Everyone on this side of things, God bless you. Thanks. I hope that helped. It's very complicated stuff, I know. It's something that an understanding of which unfolds over time. Read Valentin Tolberg. This stuff's gone into detail there too in his books. And of course, read the Saints. There's also a great book I read recently, which is called The Little Russian Filioquia, if I pronounce that right. Saint Seraphim Sarov, which is translated by Seraphim Rose. That's another excellent small book on mystical practice. So God bless you, everyone. See you on